Hi everyone, I'm Michael Abadi and welcome to Vermont Senate Spotlight. We're getting ready to start a session, the second half of the biennium coming up, and immediately, very soon in January, the State Senate is going to be looking at Bill H-526, Shoreline Protection Bill, and I'm very pleased to introduce Senator Bob Hartwell from Bennington County. Democrat. Thanks for making it.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and you've been handed a bill. 526 was passed quite healthily in the House in the spring.
Yes, it was.
And at that point, it was handed off to the Senate. And where are we in the process now?
Well, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, of which I'm chair, has the bill, and we're going to take it up in January and review, of course, what the House did. We actually took some testimony on the bill right at the end of the session, and then the determination was made that it would be helpful, and I think the Senate leadership definitely thought it would be helpful if we arranged for public meetings around the state to explain the bill and explain what we're trying to do in lake shoreline protection. And we did that. There are a total, I believe, of 7 meetings. We've had 6 of them scattered all across the state, and there'll be a last one on the 8th of January at the State House.
Right here, yeah.
And this was a very interesting process to deal with a topic that there's a lot of interest in. And we really have some challenging water quality problems in Vermont. And this bill seeks to deal with at least part of it in preserving lakes and ponds. So the House did a lot of work, gave us a comprehensive bill. We will definitely take it up, and we'll be dealing with it in terms of what we've heard from people this last summer, and try to come up, craft a bill that accomplishes the water quality goals that we have, but also at the same time has a process that's really understandable and fair to all people who may have to seek some kind of permission in order to further develop waterfront property on lakes and ponds.
Great. So a commission was created, the Shoreland Protection Commission of the Senate, right? It's made up of senators and House members?
It's made up of senators and House members. It actually was created in the budget bill right toward the end of the session, so there was an appropriation. It is made up of both committees. Chairman David Dean of the House Committee and I chaired this and kind of took the lake shoreline protection issues on the road, so to speak, and we were as far away as we went to places like North Hero, and we were up in Newport, Lake Maury, Castleton, Middlebury. We went all over the state to get input from people who care about water quality issues and had questions about further development and regulation of waterfront property on lakes and ponds.
Right. So mostly at those meetings, which were held near lakes, I think you were kind of parked on Lake Memphremagog for one of them, weren't you?
Yeah.
You heard from camp owners with a lot of concerns about the permit process that's yet to be defined.
Defined, right. Yes. We did hear some concerns about whether or not, the concerns I think essentially were whether or not the Agency of Natural Resources could really handle this permitting in a reasonably timely fashion, and the second part was whether or not the standards and regulations that might come into effect would be understandable and fair and clear. And one of the things that we're really determined to do in the Senate is to be sure that those standards are clear and understandable, and then second, that there's a process that people understand and believe will actually work. And so we are looking at some alternative ways of doing the permitting. I mean, there is a bill, a proposal that actually came out of our committee that the district environmental commissions be the permitting entity. This is not to put the process into Act 250, but since the district commissions exist, they're used to these kinds of applications. This would make it, I think, more similar to people going to a planning commission or a development review board looking for a permit. And it makes it clearer than going to the Agency of Natural Resources, which a lot of people are very concerned about. I don't know whether those concerns are well-founded or not, but they see the agency as a very large bureaucracy that they may get lost in. I'm not sure that's not necessarily the case at all, but that concern was expressed, and the clarity of the standards issue was also expressed. So we want to deal with those two things and come up with a process that's really clearly understandable, and standards that are understandable, and an application process that makes sense and will be handled in a reasonably expeditious fashion. So those are two of our big goals. But the House did a lot of work on this topic, and there's a tremendous amount of help in their bill, and we want to be sure that we take that bill and don't do any violence to what they've done.
The spirit of it, right?
Yeah.
And the House defines is it a 100-foot zone off the lake that would be subject to some permitting? Is it 100 foot?
It's 100. Well, there's actually a 250-foot area of interest, and then there's I don't have the bill in front of me, but the 100-foot part, which was controversial because some lots are actually smaller and they don't have that depth, and that has to be dealt with, because it's not the intention of the House bill, and certainly won't be in any revision that we might make to make any pre-existing lot undevelopable. That is clearly not the intention, and we'll be sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
But there's in the other states that have been used as reference in the summer kind of roadshow process, as we referred to it, New Hampshire and Maine are very helpful, because both states have very clear systems here that we looked at. Maine has a lot of deferral to the towns in issuing permits for lakeshore development. New Hampshire's kind of a top-down. You would have thought it might have been the other way around, given the politics, but New Hampshire has a state overview of the Department of Environmental Services is very much involved in. And both states have really been very successful in preserving water quality, much more so than we have. And so we've looked at those, and we're going to look again. In fact, my committee in the spring took testimony from both of those agencies, the one in Maine and the one in New Hampshire, about how their regulatory process works, and they've obviously had a lot of success. And unfortunately, our water quality in Vermont is clearly substandard. It's arguably the worst in New England, and that's a little embarrassing, quite frankly, to us. So we think we really need to deal with this. And there are other issues out there. There's going to be the issue of rivers and streams, and ultimately getting runoff, and ultimately getting to the serious problems involving Lake Champlain. So. But this is a start. It's not meant to single out lakes and ponds as if that solves all of our problems. It doesn't. And I think people are right to point out that the streams are a big deal, and we need to address them. And that came up on a number of occasions on the summer hearings.
Okay. The Vermont bill does have provisions for if a town has a zoning in place that's equivalent to the state, you could work through the town, or no? You mentioned yes. Maine has a sort of a town-heavy process.
It has a fairly town-heavy process. The irony of Maine is that the Maine statute's actually modeled on a Vermont law that once existed in the 70s and was allowed to expire.
Okay.
I think that was an unintended side effect from the enactment of Act 250, if I had to guess. I wasn't around for it, but the Maine law does have kind of this deferral process to the towns. There is some contention, to be candid about it, in my committee about whether or not we should do that, or whether we should be more like New Hampshire, where you really do have the state involved throughout the process. And New Hampshire's got a pretty strong law, and it's worked well, and I think it's a good model because there are so many lakes in New Hampshire. New Hampshire clearly has more of this than we do,
right.
And they set a very good example. So we have to work through in the Natural Resources Committee which way we want to go on whether or not this deferral system should exist, and also how the permit application should be made and where it should be made to.
Okay. Vermont has, and I don't know if Maine and New Hampshire are similar, a lot of little lakes. I think there's 821, it was the number I last saw, that appear to be developed as camps, summer-only places, like in the 20s and 30s. So that means a whole host of, now that we're in 2013, a lot of septic systems are starting to, need retirement, and I don't know if the bill deals with that issue.
It does not, and it's been talked about, and this is an issue that's been a problem along the way because some of these systems obviously are failing. The other factor is that more and more of these seasonal homes are morphing into year-round homes and even permanent residences. So some of these issues are going to have to be faced up to by property owners. But it's an area that's regulated by A&R, but not in this bill. We really intentionally stayed away from it. We thought the apparatus is in place to deal with that.
Okay.
And we would not propose to have a system that would question, a process in our case that would question the status of septic systems. That's a separate issue. We would, this proposal is to go ahead and deal with the actual lakeshore protection issue in terms of of what's going on the surface.
Great. Now, just recently, I noticed on the web, on the Commission's website, you put up a draft report, basically summarizing everything you learned from visiting over the summertime.
Yes.
And a really nice job of public comment themes, like collecting different public comments and putting them in different baskets and saying, look, a bunch of people are saying this, a bunch of people. Do you want to share a little bit how about you built that report? It's testimony to the fact that it really is a part-time legislature in name only. Clearly worked hard, right?
Yeah,
right
we did
through
work
the
hard
summer
on it,
into
and
the fall.
credit should be given where credit is due. Our legislative counsel, our attorneys who work for us, we have two in particular who work for the Natural Resources Committee. These people are so valuable to us in terms of putting these kinds of things together. And all of that drafting was actually done in the Office of the Legislative Counsel. Okay. And then we looked at it and commented on it. We actually had meetings about it after all the summer visits were done. And I really liked coming up when they came up with clustering the issues in clusters. And then you can also see all the comments. All of the comments were on cards and were scanned into a file. So that we have all of the material that was collected, and so you can kind of see the groupings of people who are concerned about whether A&R will handle this, or are concerned about whether or not the standards are specific enough, or and you still have a theme, I think, throughout this process of people are very concerned about water quality, and they want to do the right thing, but they don't want to have the legislature create a lot of confusion in the process of getting where we're trying to go.
Right. And then I guess, I don't know if it's a theory or only a theory, that while this bill is being figured out and potentially passed, are camp owners just going to get the chainsaws out and have a party before the bill passes?
Before the bill. Well, that was discussed a lot in the spring. But there would be mischief, if you will. In the meantime, there's some anecdotal evidence that that's going on, but not a great deal from what we can tell. We're not looking everywhere. We can't be everywhere. I think that, it may be because people really don't think that way, which would be nice, or we're still coming out of this big recession and we don't have a lot of development yet. I don't know, what's causing it. Quite candidly, my concern all along was more the second year than the first. If we were going to let this go over yet into another biennium, which I personally think is a big mistake, we might have just people who just don't want to wait around while they figure out what the legislature's going to do. So I really think it's important to pass a bill that's effective in July, effective with the new fiscal year, and people so that there's a clear understanding. But I think the short answer is there's not a lot of that going on from what we can tell.
Okay, thanks. I actually, we have a family camp, and we had to get permits for shoreline encroachment when Irene knocked down an old railroad tie retaining wall, probably from the 20s. And I don't know if you know about the shoreline encroachment program that's already in place, where camp owners have to get permits to do anything right at the water. but I've been surprised I've read pretty much every article I could find on it, and there doesn't seem to be much reference to what's already in place. There already is a permitting process that people go to A&R for as camp owners. I don't know if you know much about what is presently there. It was called shoreline encroachment,
yeah.
and I don't know how this permit process would interact with that permit process. Has that been looked at, the connection to what already exists?
Well, I think to the extent, and we haven't looked at that a great deal yet on the Senate side. I think it was discussed in the House.
It was, okay.
This bill really addresses trying to restrain the runoff and flow of nutrients and so forth into the lake. And to the extent that there are encroachments that might relate to that, I suppose the encroachment permitting might come into play. A lot of those attributes are already in place. This is a cousin to the docks issue. The docks are completely separately regulated, and we never intended to get into interfering with the dock permitting program. There was some very inaccurate information being passed around about that in the spring. So to the extent that those programs exist, they continue to exist.
Okay.
What we're trying to do is have this, we know that if there's the right kind of vegetation around, rather than just cut grass, we know the water's going to flow a lot more slowly and there's going to be fewer nutrients getting into the ponds, and this will help a lot on water quality and controlling invasives and so forth.
Sure. And when you mentioned misinformation, I know it kind of got to the point where people were saying it would be illegal to mow your lawn, or
right. I know.
So you feel like you were able to address those concerns over the summer? You felt like word got through?
I think it did. I think we made some real progress on that front. I think there was some confusion in the beginning, and we were able to clarify that, and that we're not interfering with existing development. This is about what happens if you add a big addition to a house or put a lot of impervious surface in, driveways or whatever that would come under the purview of this process. But we're certainly not trying to change what's there. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion was in this business about not being able to cut pre-existing lawns and rake leaves and so forth. I think I hope that was clarified, because it certainly was an opportunity when we went on the road for people to come in and express their concerns and ask questions, and they did. I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 people actually show, and we've had inputs, electronically to the website, and all of the communication that we tried to set up so that people could express themselves and ask questions. So I think it's clearer now. I hope it is.
Great. And then there's one final hearing, and you said January 8th?
January 8th
here
in the State House.
Montpelier. Okay.
Yes.
In the evening, probably?
In the evening. I hesitate to say the hour because I can't remember for sure, but it is an evening, probably around 6 but
Great.
That's also going to be posted on the legislative website. You can go to the Lakeshore Protection Commission very easily on the website. You'll see the schedules along with all the documents that you've been referring to.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there. And then do you anticipate the commission having a life beyond this bill?
No.
No, okay. Okay. So looking again at this session, you've got some other concerns, issues, ideas, and topics you want to get on the table. That the energy siting bill in particular, maybe if you could give people a little primer on the background there, and then explain where the ball may be moving.
Well, this bill flows from the wind moratorium issue that came up a year ago. But it's an energy siting process that we think is missing, and some of the inspiration for this you'll see in the Governor's Siting Policy Commission report, that this is not a very democratic process in determining whether or not to issue certificates of public good for really big projects that have lots of impact, and they do. And what we've done, or what I hope we're going to do, and we're certainly going to look at it, is a process that clarifies what the value of people's testimony really is in a proceeding, and that really has a clear understanding about how the Act 250 criteria are to be applied, if they are, and bringing the regional planning commissions in as a resource for trying to determine how best to handle energy siting within a region. And that brings the towns in a kind of a coordinated fashion to have a process that people can really participate in and understand, and that the people, that the evidence that is offered by the regional planning commissions will be taken very seriously and will be in fact dispositive. And this is the way it works in Act 250. If you have a project that really runs afoul of the regional plan, usually it doesn't happen. And this process would be to try to determine what's the best way to site large projects in sensitive areas where they shouldn't be, and let the Vermonters kind of make this determination, making a much more democratic process. It's very confusing now, very expensive. It's a quasi-judicial process before the Public Service Board, and people really don't, they just really aren't able to participate effectively. And that's what we're trying to address, is how to put this process back into the hands of people who, of Vermonters, so that they can determine what it is they want.
Is there actually a bill ready to go that would strengthen the public hearing process, or what would be on the table to actually strengthen that voice?
There is a bill. It's actually S-201, which is a bill I had drafted, not because I expect the bill to be passed as is, but I needed a framework for the committee to start to work with. We've done the same thing with solid waste as well, because I think if you go in with a framework of a possible bill to work with, it's more efficient, and then people can say, well, I don't like this provision, and then we can change it. But it's, we just have a lot on our plate for this winter, and so I had a bill drafted on energy siting. I had one drafted on solid waste, in order just to get the conversation going in the committee and to allow people to have a reference point when they testify.
Okay. Now, what needs to happen in solid waste? What do you see going on there?
Well, that's the Act 148 process, which that law really lays out some pretty aggressive goals for doing a lot better than the 30% or so diversion rate we have right now from the landfill, and we need to get that much higher, and I think we all agree on that. And so, and how do we deal with organics and food scraps and some of the more difficult infrastructure that we're going to need, and there are some examples locally where people are doing a very good job with that. But I think that's we need to put something more formal in place. The other issue is the number of solid waste districts we have, and whether or not that's really as efficient as it could be. And then the third thing is the materials, the resource facilities, recovery facilities that we refer to as the MRFs, such as the Chittenden Solid Waste District. It's only a matter of time until virtually everything goes through those facilities, and so that raises the specter of how long do you need the bottle bill, which in some of our view, I think it's become something of an anachronism. And eventually, and one thing we've discovered that most people didn't realize, I didn't realize, and I don't think the Agency of Natural Resources realized it at all, is a number of deposit containers that are going through the single stream system, so that the consumer is not receiving back the nickel.
Getting the nickel, right.
And that is a problem in my view, that the people just, the bins at the end of the driveway, and they don't take the cans back. So
that nickel ends up in whose pockets?
Well, it's right now, a lot of it's ending up, as I understand it, in the redemption centers, and I don't know how many of them there are, but there's several, I don't know, 6 or 8 of them that are pretty big. And they are sitting on a lot of money, apparently, because they're beginning to resist our attempts to face up to the fact that I think all of this is going to begin to flow through the materials, the resource recovery operations that are called the single stream system.
Okay.
And that's expanding very, very quickly, particularly in the Northeast. In New England, there are new facilities coming on stream. There's lots of capacity, and they take everything. I mean, some of it's worth more than others, and glass isn't worth much. You grind it up almost like sand, and then it's used for road work. But the bottles and cans, the PET and the aluminum have some real value, and those are being recycled and sold in the open market, and that's bringing money into Vermont.
The movement to expand the bottle bill to include water containers, you see that as sort of going the opposite direction of trends? Or does that make any sense?
No, it doesn't, because it would be going in the opposite direction, and I don't think we should do that. There are bills to do it, but I think when people understand what the marketplace is really doing with solid waste, they'll be amazed. I mean, I think there's a responsibility on the part of of the resource recovery operations that exist out there and others who are interested in this, who understand it, to educate the legislature and others about what's really going on here. It's actually very interesting. It's a big business. I didn't know that the insides of Vermont teddy bears are PET bottles, crushed up. I mean, I didn't know that until I went to a show. So, and most people probably don't. And some of these products have a really good market if they're recycled properly, and it can bring economic benefit to Vermont. So it's going to be interesting to look at it and see what people say and what the arguments are as we go forward. So we'll have everybody will get their say, before we
You
go.
said Vermont's at 30% diversion.
I think
waste
it's
stream.
low 30s. Yeah.
Is that good for a state? Are we?
It's not great.
It's
It's
not
better
great.
than some. There are others that are doing better, including states that don't have bottle bills. But it's not great. And I think A&R thinks it should be way up in the 60s, and I think they're right. And I think we can do that. We can't do it in a year or two, but the flow is to keep as much of this out of the landfills as possible and recognize that a lot of this so-called waste has some real economic value. It can be reused. A lot of a true recycling in a marketplace. It's interesting to go through these resource recovery operations because what looks like trash comes in one end, and what you see at the other end is baled or even shrink-wrapped pallets of product that has real value that goes out the other end of the building and brings revenue into Vermont.
Great.
Yeah.
It's been cold, and I don't know if you want to share a little bit about the comprehensive energy plan quickly. I guess we got like 3 minutes.
Okay, sure. I think there's a mandate, the legislature's mandated that we have a comprehensive energy plan, and I think we should. I think the problem is that, from my perspective, is given the mix of fuels that's available and what's going on, there's a stunning amount of, it's really been in the news big time, the list in the last couple of weeks about how much oil and gas there is in North America. And I think we have to figure out that we're going to use a lot of it. Certainly there's a lot of proposal for expansion of natural gas in Vermont, which would reduce the cost of doing business. And we have a very high cost of doing business in Vermont. We really need to deal with it, and this is one of the areas. So I think the part about the comprehensive energy plan that bothers me a little is the 90% renewables by 2050, because it's a little hard to
set.
It's a little hard to tell where it came from, and it's not in state law. So I think we're going to look at that part as to whether, because the temptation is to try to reach a goal that may be temporary or maybe somehow inaccurate or unachievable, and that could cost us a lot of money if we mishandle that. So we're going to look at that part and be sure that we're looking at the entire picture of what's going to be available to us in the future.
Okay. I think we are out of time. I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you.
And wish you a productive session. It's going to kick off right quick here.
It will.
And good night, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.